Hello, a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on this week's show, anger erupts over the region following Donald Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. We take a look at a city divided by religion, politics, and much more. Iraq declares victory over the Islamic State group, but some places, including Biaji, a former industrial hub, remain a devastated ghost city. Also coming up, an interview with one of Iran's most acclaimed artists. Shirin Neshat joins us from New York to talk about her latest film about Egyptian diva Oum Kulthum. We start with the protests that have been flaring across the region after the US president's formal recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Donald Trump announced last week he will be moving the US embassy to the contested city, which is holy to Muslims, Jews, and Christians. The decision has reversed decades of US policy, drawing criticism from global leaders, as well as warnings of potential damage to prospects for Middle East peace. Shona Bhattacharya now takes a look at Jerusalem, dubbed by many as the divided city.
For 50 years, Jerusalem has been entirely controlled by the Israelis. From 1949 to 1967, the city was split in two. The west was Jewish, administered by Israel. The east, controlled by Jordan. These days, the separation between the two no longer exists. And despite international condemnation, Israelis say Jerusalem is a unified city. But large differences remain depending on the neighborhood. Michael Leff is Israeli. He lives in this wealthy western Jerusalem area that's mostly Jewish.
We have cafes, a pool not far from here, we have a movie theater.
Ziad Hamouri is Palestinian. He holds a resident card given by the Israeli government and lives in this eastern neighborhood that's mostly Arab and poorly maintained.
This is a street here. In West Jerusalem, they are on daily basis cleaning the streets.
The narrow and dirty streets in the east contrast with larger and cleaner avenues in the west. Several Israeli NGOs have noted the differences from a development standpoint in education, public services, recreation, and healthcare. For Ziad Hamouri, it's part of a policy of neglect by City Hall.
To do our life difficult, to leave the city.
An argument rejected by Michael Leff, who points to efforts to integrate different communities like this brand new shopping center.
We've got Muslims, Jew, Christians. Our populations are mixed. Anyway, we can't be separated.
Still, he admits Israelis rarely go to eastern neighborhoods because they fear for their safety. For him, splitting the city in two, a key Palestinian demand, is out of the question.
What do you want? You want Berlin? You want there to be a wall to separate the population? No, this city is forever unified.
Ziad Hamouri could change things by voting, but he refuses to. He doesn't feel represented.
It's an occupied area. In the end of the day, you don't feel that it's your municipality.
One city, two realities that had been at odds for half a century.
To Iraq now, where a military parade in the capital celebrated a territorial victory over the Islamic State group this weekend. This more than 3 years after the jihadist fighters captured 1/3 of the country and imposed their rule over some 10 million people. Now, thousands of Iraqi troops have been killed in the fierce battles that erupted in 2014. And the Islamic State group may be gone, however, little now remains but piles of rubble. France 24's Diptyka Laurent takes a look at the city of Biaji, which is the most destroyed place in Iraq after Western Mosul.
There's no running water, electricity, or infrastructure here in the Iraqi city of Biaji. Buildings have been reduced to piles of debris. Yet Biaji was once a bustling industrial hub. It was home to Iraq's biggest oil refinery and chemical plants, about 200 kilometers from the capital, Baghdad.
The houses were destroyed by those terrorist gangs from the Islamic State group. They destroyed government apartments, schools, everything in this city, even makeshift houses and farms.
During the battle to free Biaji, Much of the fighting was done in the streets and in door-to-door battles. 2 years after the city was freed, 90% of it still lies in ruins today, and the city is devoid of residents. They fled a long time ago.
It was a horrible war. The jihadists were evil. If civilians chose to stay, they were killed. That's why most of them fled.
The city suffered so much damage that the National Parliament declared it a disaster zone in 2016. Local officials say they're still waiting for the government to unblock funds set aside for rebuilding Baiji. They fear, though, it won't be enough to help rebuild homes. In the meantime, residents continue to languish in camps. Many of them don't know when they'll return home, or even if they'll have a home to return to.
In Turkey, a trial began on Monday against the alleged shooter in the attack on the Rain nightclub on the outskirts of Istanbul on New Year's Eve. Albul Kadir Masharipov, an Uzbek militant, refused to testify, although he has already confessed to killing 39 people in the onslaught, most of them foreigners. The 35-year-old faces 40 life sentences, one for each of the victims and the massacre itself. In Saudi Arabia, a decades-old ban on movie theatres has been lifted. According to officials, the first multiplexes are expected to open in March 2018. The conservative kingdom ordinarily frowns upon non-religious forms of entertainment, but this move is part of the young crown prince's bid to loosen strict moral codes. It comes as Mohammed bin Salman widens a political purge to reportedly amass more power for himself at home. Now, if you're familiar with the Iranian artists, you'll know this name, Shirin Neshat. Her photographs, Women of Allah, catapulted the New Yorker to international acclaim in the 1990s. She has since displayed her work at the Met, the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, and the Serpentine Gallery, to name but a few. This time, she's returned with a film within a film about Egyptian diva Oum Kulthum, who became an icon of female emancipation in the region. Let's now watch a clip of Looking for Oum Kulthum.
You speak English? A little bit. So, let's start with you singing one of your favorite Oum Kulthum songs, and then we'll have you read some lines.
برضاك يا خليل رغبتي ورغاي.
Shirin Neshat joins us from New York. Thank you so much for speaking to us here on Middle East Matters.
Thank you for having me.
Now, it seems you are once again, if I'm right, with this film, finding yourself drawn to the stories of Muslim women and their struggles.
With Oum Kulthum, I think she is a phenomenon, commonly known as the most important artist of the 20th century in the Middle East. And I think for me, selfishly, as a woman artist from the Middle East, you know, I think she became such an important icon. So I wanted to pay a tribute to her and also look up to her as how we can learn from her as such an important woman in the Muslim world.
Now, watching the movie, Shirin, I picked up on some parallels. There's, of course, this plight of an Iranian woman artist living in exile. Just how much of you does the protagonist Mitra represent?
Well, my most important interest is how women, when they choose to pursue their passion, a career, they often have to sacrifice a traditional life, a personal life. And I think Oum Kulthum is an example of how she really gave everything she had to her music and her fans. And I think, selfishly, I find myself and many other women artists have to endure as somewhat of an isolated life in a way by in devoting yourself to your career. So I was very interested in going under the skin of such an iconic artist. But the film shows the impossibility of really going under the skin of a mythical artist such as Oum Kulthum. So I think I was really looking for answers for some personal issues of my own while really paying tribute to her.
Now, there is a scene where Mitra, the filmmaker, is asked, "You're Iranian, why are you making a film about Kulthum?" Is that a question that you were confronted with, although this is clearly not a straight-up biopic?
Yes, for many people, it became a huge curiosity how me, as a Shia Iranian artist living in the U.S., would develop such an obsession with such an iconic Egyptian singer without speaking the language, without knowing the depth of the Arabic culture. But I think Oum Kulthum has transcended these issues. To me, she's an international star and a muse of many people across the Middle East, from Iran, Israel to Saudi Arabia, and I give myself that courage to do so. And again, this is not a biopic. This is not a film that intending to be authentic, but it's really from a perspective of an artist.
And briefly, what I find interesting is that with your work, you often explore the relationship between the personal and the political, but you don't necessarily divulge your own views on politics. Is that because you want to leave that to your artwork to do?
Well, my work, regardless of whether it's been a photograph or a video or a movie, has always been about this counterpoint between pursuing very deeply existential personal issues of my own life as an artist in exile from Iran, living in the U.S., but also caring deeply about social political crisis and how I could create a story, a concept, a photograph that could sort of navigate between the personal and the social. And I think this film, through the power of music, arts, really does travel through very important political issues. The question of being Shia and Sunni, the question of the Western image about the Muslim people, particularly female population, and finally the sense that we are all inferior population next to the Western culture. And I think this film confuses those ideas about our identities.
Shirin Neshat, award-winning Iranian artist. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Middle East Matters.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sanamjan.
That's it for this edition of Middle East Matters. You can always catch up with our latest news and shows on Facebook and Twitter. Do stay tuned to France 24.